One more flyer, just one stack left. That's another $10. 900 more flyers today means $90 total. Subtract bus fare. That leaves enough for rent but not food. Or food but not rent. Zara Jackson wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her University of Lagos diploma worth nothing on this Seoul street corner where strangers waved her away like she was invisible. Work harder. Distribute faster. Save enough to prove coming here wasn't a mistake. Tomorrow, she'd do it all again. I'm not getting married. Hongwei Juno didn't even look up from the acquisition report spread across the obsidian conference table. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul sprawled beneath him like a kingdom he'd bled to conquer. Juno, ya! His grandmother's voice could shatter bulletproof glass. Halmoni. He finally raised his eyes, meeting the furious gaze of the 78-year-old woman who'd raised him after his parents were murdered. We've discussed this. Discussed? Disgust? Madame CEO's tiny frame shook with theatrical rage. When you were a boy, I called you my precious grandson. When you became a man, I called you brilliant. Now you're 33 years old and still alone in that cold bed. Do you want to die like a beast? Alone? Unmourned? Juno's executives had long since learned to study their shoes during these confrontations. This ungrateful child. Madame So clutched her chest, staggering. Someone, where is my medication? No, forget the medication. Where's a rope? I'll hang myself right here, right now. Save me the heartbreak of watching my bloodline end. Halmoni, please, I'll do it. I'm climbing on this chair right now. Madame So, your health... One of the executives reached out helplessly. Don't touch me. Let me die. I'll face my ancestors in shame, but at least I won't have to watch this stubborn boy destroy everything we built. Wait. Before this gets crazy, hit that like button and subscribe right now because you do not want to miss what's coming. This Mafia king is about to fall hard, and I'm talking assassination attempts, backstabbing betrayals, a scheming grandmother, and a wedding that goes completely off the rails. Trust me, you'll want to be here for every second. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and I love connecting with you all. All right, let's dive in. Fine. Juno's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Thank you for the performance, Halmoni. That trick worked better when I was 12. He stood, straightening his cufflinks with deliberate calm, the hand tattoos, traditional Korean dragons wrapped around modern geometric patterns, shifting beneath his tailored sleeves. I have a meeting with the Busan territory. We're done here. Done! Done! Madame Seo's tears evaporated instantly, replaced by calculating fury. You ungrateful boy. Fine. Don't get married. But you will give me a great-grandchild. Tonight. Juno paused at the door. I'm sending someone to your penthouse. A suitable woman. Well-bred. Fertile. You'll do your duty, or I'll rewrite my will and leave everything to charity. Halmoni, go. Have your meeting. But tonight, you'll meet her. I've already made the arrangements. So, boss... Park Sung-min leaned against the doorframe, barely suppressing a smirk. Your grandmother really did it this time. The woman's already been sent to your penthouse. Background checked, NDA signed, apparently very accommodating. Juno didn't look up from his laptop. Cancel it. Come on, man. Do your grandmother this one favor. Besides, Sung-min's voice lowered. You're the most powerful man in Seoul, CEO of Juno Group, controller of half the underground territory from Gangnam to Itaewon. You've built an empire that makes grown men piss themselves in fear. Your point? My point is, what's it all for if you die alone? No kids, no legacy, just a very expensive grave and a fortune that'll get torn apart by vultures the second you're cold. Sung-min crossed his arms. Your grandmother's not wrong. You need an heir. I need reliable distribution networks in Incheon. I need the Lee family to stop testing boundaries. I don't need a woman picked out like breeding stock. But if you did it just this once? Sungmin. Juno's voice went cold enough to frost the windows. Do you really think anyone can make me do something I don't want? A beat of silence. Then Sungmin grinned, backing away with raised hands. Fair point, boss. Just think about it. You're 33, not immortal. Even gangsters need someone to carry their name. After he left, Juno stared at the Seoul skyline. His empire, his rules, his life. No one would change that. Not even the stubborn old woman who'd saved him, raised him, and loved him despite the blood on his hands. Traffic had stopped. Juno's motorcade, 3 armored Mercedes, 4 bodyguards, enough firepower to start a small war, sat trapped in midday congestion on a busy intersection. Through the tinted windows, Seoul moved around him. Businessmen checking phones, students laughing, street vendors hawking food. Normal people, normal lives, things he'd never have. Then he saw her. A young black woman in a red and white dress stumbled on the curb, her arms full of flyers that exploded into the air like desperate prayers. She fell in slow motion, and Juno's hand was on the door handle before his brain caught up. Sir, his driver started. Juno was already out. He caught her before she hit the pavement, one arm around her waist, their faces inches apart. Her eyes, dark and furious and exhausted, met his. The Seoul traffic roared around them. The flyers fell like snow. And Hongwei Juno, who'd spent 33 years building walls around his heart, felt them all collapse in a single instant. I've got you, he heard himself say. She blinked. Who are you? He didn't have an answer, because looking at her, he suddenly didn't know anymore. Zara Jackson came to Seoul carrying dreams too big for Lagos, armed with a university degree and enough determination to move mountains. Reality delivered minimum wage, 12-hour days distributing flyers that strangers threw away without reading, and a tiny apartment where she counted coins to decide between eating and staying warm. $10 per bundle. Endless bundles. An exhausting, humiliating grind that made her question everything. Hongwei Juno had built an empire on violence, strategy, and absolute control. At 33, he commanded Seoul's underworld, ran a multi-billion-won corporate empire, and trusted no one beyond his ruthless grandmother. Women had tried everything. Seduction, manipulation, pregnancy traps. He'd seen every scheme and felt nothing. Love was weakness. Marriage was a liability. His grandmother's latest tactic involved matchmakers, threats, and theatrical suicide attempts. The collision happened on a Wednesday when traffic stopped and destiny didn't. One stumble, one catch, one moment. The man who'd never believed in love at first sight fell anyway, and the woman who'd sworn she'd never depend on anyone was about to discover that some forces of nature can't be resisted, only survived. Everything changed. Nothing would ever be the same. The city was doing what it always did at 5:47 in the evening, pushing people forward with elbows, horns, and impatience. Zara had learned to move with it, not against it. But that day her heel caught the edge of a broken curb, and the rhythm betrayed her. Her body pitched forward, flyers slipping from her fingers like startled birds. She never actually hit the ground. A hand closed around her arm, firm and steady, stopping the fall before panic could finish forming. Momentum brought her closer than either of them expected. The world narrowed to the space between two faces and the soft flutter of paper landing around their feet. For Juno, the moment landed wrong in the best possible way. He had caught falling people before. He had stopped fights, intercepted threats, redirected chaos with practiced ease. This was none of that. This was a stranger with wide eyes and ink-smudged fingers, breathing fast against his chest. His heart reacted before his mind could correct it, beating harder, faster, as if something essential had been challenged. "You're okay," he said, though the words were unnecessary. His grip loosened, but his attention did not. Zara nodded too quickly. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry. I wasn't looking. She bent down at once, kneeling on concrete without hesitation, gathering flyers as if they were fragile things. Juno followed her movement without thinking, crouching beside her in a suit that cost more than the entire stack of paper now smudged with street dust. The flyers were simple. Park Marketing Company, event promotion, contact details printed in plain ink. Nothing flashy, honest work. I've got them, he said, reaching for one that had skidded beneath a parked car. You don't have to, she replied, already reaching for the same one. Their fingers brushed, and the unfamiliar sensation came back, sharper this time. He noticed everything then, the faint crease between her brows, the way embarrassment colored her cheeks rather than her voice, the absence of calculation in her eyes. Against every instinct that had governed his life, he asked, "What's your name?" The question surprised them both. She paused, flyers held to her chest. Zara? It was just a name. It should have passed through him and gone. It did not. Thank you, Zara, he said, for not falling. She laughed once, short and nervous. I didn't really earn that. She stood, dusted her hands on her jeans, and gave him a polite nod that signaled an ending. Have a good evening. As she walked away, Juno remained where he was, watching until the crowd absorbed her. His bodyguards were already moving. He didn't have to look to know. He felt it the way he felt a shift in pressure before a storm. Don't, he said quietly. Too late, one of them replied just as softly. By the time Juno stepped into his car, her name was already being entered into systems that existed to answer questions most people never asked. He stared out the window as the city slid past, irritated with himself for allowing it, more irritated that he wanted the answers anyway. That night, he changed his route. Park Marketing Company occupied the third floor of a narrow building that smelled of toner and burned coffee. Zara was still there when he arrived, seated behind a folding table with a cardboard box beside her. The box was half empty. She looked up, recognition flickering into caution. You, she said. Me, he replied, stopping at a respectful distance. He gestured to the box. Those are the same flyers. They are, she said. And we're closing. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a neat stack of bills. I'll take the rest. Her eyes dropped to the cash, then lifted again, sharper now. That's too much. It's 5,000. I know what it is. She pushed the box slightly back with her foot. They're 10 cents each. I'm paying for convenience. She shook her head. No, you're paying to feel like this is something else. The words hit him harder than any refusal he'd heard in years. I don't need the money, she added, as if clarifying for herself. I need the job. He watched her for a moment, the faint hum of the building filling the space between them. What if I told you I respect that? Then I'd say respect doesn't come with cash bribes. A corner of his mouth lifted despite himself. He counted out the exact amount owed, placing it neatly on the table. Then I'll pay the rate. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing the bills as if confirming they were real. Thank you. He picked up the box himself, light in his hands. Walk me out. She did. In the hallway, she stopped. You didn't even ask what the flyers were for. I already know, he said, then corrected himself. I mean, I read them. Her eyes searched his face, suspicion still there, but something else too. Curiosity, perhaps, or the same strange pull he had felt on the street. As they parted, Juno realized something unsettling. For the first time in 33 years, control had not protected him. It had only delayed the collision. Juno began showing up the way a shadow does, quietly at first, then so often that it became impossible to pretend it was coincidence. Zara noticed him one morning while handing out flyers near the subway exit, his tailored coat out of place among office workers rushing past. He bought coffee from the street vendor she greeted every day, paid in cash, nodded once in her direction, and left without a word. The next afternoon, he stood across the street pretending to take a call while she worked, eyes lifted only when she laughed at something a passerby said. By the end of the week, his presence had stitched itself into the rhythm of her days. It wasn't just her corner. At Park Marketing, where Zara spent her afternoons entering data and pitching ideas no one seemed ready to hear, Juno appeared again, this time in the conference room. His company, one of the city's most guarded conglomerates, suddenly needed branding consultation. He sat at the long glass table while Zara poured water for clients, his gaze steady, unreadable. When their eyes met, he smiled like he'd won something. Zara felt heat rise in her chest, not flattery but irritation, sharp and unwelcome. Her coworkers noticed. They always did. Mina leaned close one evening as they packed up. She whispered that men like him didn't follow people unless they wanted something they weren't used to being denied. Another warned her more plainly, voice low, eyes darting, saying his name carried weight in places that didn't leave marks. Zara listened, nodded, and went back to her desk. Fear didn't quite land. What settled instead was annoyance, heavy and stubborn. The next time she saw him waiting near her flyer stack, she didn't slow her steps. She stopped in front of him, shoulders squared, exhaustion cutting through politeness. She told him to stop, not softly, not kindly. She said her work was not a game, that she didn't need watching, buying, or pretending. She said whatever he thought this was, it wasn't welcome. People nearby pretended not to listen, but the air shifted all the same. Juno didn't interrupt. That alone surprised her. He stood there, hands loose at his sides, eyes bright with something unfamiliar. Rejection did not bruise him the way it did other men. It sharpened him. He apologized once, calmly, and stepped back, giving her space. Zara walked away with her pulse racing, convinced that was the end of it. She was wrong. If anything, his interest settled deeper. He learned her hours, not from following but from pattern. He sent no flowers, made no loud gestures. Instead, opportunities brushed close to her life, close enough to feel intentional. When Park Marketing landed a sudden pitch with an international firm, Juno's influence hovered just out of sight. When Zara struggled to pay rent after her landlord raised the price without warning, a recruiter's email appeared in her inbox the same night. While Zara tried to ignore him, someone else did not. Juno's grandmother had survived enough decades to know when rumors carried truth. She heard whispers at a charity dinner about her grandson skipping meetings, about a girl with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes. The old woman smiled into her tea and asked careful questions. She sent her driver past Zara's corner one afternoon, then again the next day. She learned the girl's name, her hours, the way she handed flyers as if each one mattered. Curiosity turned to concern, and concern to strategy. If this girl had caught Juno's attention, she needed to know why. The offer came without ceremony. Juno asked Zara to meet him in his office, high above the city she knew only from sidewalks. He spoke plainly. He said he admired her discipline, her refusal to bend. He said he needed someone with her instincts. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a contract, clean and thorough. The number stood out like a dare. $80,000 a year, benefits included. More money than she had ever seen offered to someone like her. Zara didn't touch the folder. She laughed once, short and sharp, then stopped. She told him she wasn't for sale. She said she wouldn't trade her independence for comfort wrapped in obligation. She said the offer felt like charity wearing a suit, and worse, like a leash. Juno listened, jaw tight, pride and frustration warring behind his eyes. Control had always come easily to him. This did not. She stood, thanked him for his time, and walked out without looking back. In the elevator, her hands shook, not from regret, but from relief. Juno remained at his desk long after she left, staring at the closed door, aware that wanting her meant stepping into territory where power meant nothing unless it was earned. Above the city, plans shifted, and below it, Zara returned to her corner, unaware that she had already changed the course of something far larger than either of them. Madame CEO did not knock the way ordinary people knocked. She announced herself with a firm, impatient rap that felt more like a verdict than a request. Zara, still in her work clothes and half asleep from a late shift, opened the door to find a woman dressed in quiet authority standing in the narrow hallway. Her posture stiff, her gaze already measuring the room behind Zara's shoulder as if it belonged to her. The apartment was small enough that nothing could be hidden. A sagging couch, a chipped table, laundry folded with care because space demanded discipline. Madame So stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, heels clicking against the worn floor as she took it all in. There was no pity in her eyes, only assessment. She got straight to the point. Her voice was calm, businesslike, stripped of softness. She said her grandson needed stability. He needed protection from gossip, from reckless choices, from women who might see his name before they saw the man. Zara listened in stunned silence as the words stacked higher and heavier, until the real proposal emerged like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Marriage. 2 years. A child. $10 million wired quietly and cleanly. A divorce arranged without scandal once the obligation was fulfilled. Madame CEO spoke as if she were offering Zara a scholarship or a contract, something reasonable, even generous. Zara felt heat rush up her neck, not from temptation, but from insult. The money landed like an accusation. The baby clause felt like ownership disguised as legacy. Zara laughed once, sharp and humorless, then told her to leave. Madame CEO tried again, this time softer, suggesting opportunity, security, a future free from scraping by. Zara's hands shook as she opened the door and pointed to the hallway. She said she was not for sale. She said she would rather stay poor than become a transaction. She said a lot of things she did not know she had been holding in for years. Madame CEO left without raising her voice, but her eyes hardened, disappointment folding neatly into resolve. The door closed. The apartment felt smaller after she was gone, as if the walls had leaned in to listen and now refused to move back. Juno learned about it that same night. The fury came fast and unfiltered. He drove straight to his grandmother's house, voice raised in a way it rarely was, demanding to know how she could humiliate someone he cared about, how she could reduce a human being to a timetable and a wire transfer. Madame So did not apologize. She told him she had protected the family before he could ruin himself. She reminded him of duty, of bloodlines, of consequences. He left without bowing, but the damage had already settled where it mattered most. Zara stopped answering his messages. When she finally agreed to see him, she did not let him inside. They stood in the dim stairwell, her arms folded, her eyes guarded. She told him his money spoke louder than his silence. She said powerful men always claimed innocence after the fact. She said intent did not erase impact. Juno tried to explain. He swore he had known nothing. He apologized without excuses. Still, she looked at him as if he were suddenly much older, much more predictable. Another man who believed access could be arranged. Another man cushioned by wealth, even when he claimed restraint. He understood then that words would not save him. So he offered something else. Not marriage, not protection, not a favor wrapped in charm. Work. He told her his company had openings she was qualified for. Real ones. Paid. Transparent. 3 months. No conditions beyond showing up and doing the job. No contracts about feelings. No expectations outside the office. If, at the end of it, she still wanted nothing to do with him, he would disappear from her life completely. No calls, no messages, no chances taken twice. Zara did not answer right away. She needed time, not to weigh attraction, but reality. Rent, bills, a life bounced on effort alone. Pride did not pay late fees. Anger did not fix a leaking sink. She hated that the offer made sense. She hated that it came from him. Yet it was clean in a way his grandmother's proposal was not. It did not ask for her body or her future. It asked only for her competence. She agreed under one condition. He would treat her like any other employee. No special access. No favors. No hovering concern. At work, he would be a name on an org chart. Nothing more. Juno accepted without hesitation. On her first day, Zara walked into the building with her shoulders squared, telling herself this was temporary, telling herself she was here for stability, not proximity. Juno watched her from a distance, resisting every instinct to step closer, to soften the tension, to explain again. He had chosen a harder path, one without guarantees. It was the only one that still left room for dignity on both sides. And somewhere between paperwork and long hours, between restrained glances and unspoken thoughts, something quieter began to form. Not as a bargain, but as a test neither of them could rush or control. Zara expected the marketing division of Juno Group to feel like a polite waiting room to something darker, a place that existed only to make the company look respectable. Instead, it was loud with deadlines, arguments, half-finished coffee cups, and people who cared fiercely about what they were building. Her first week passed in a blur of briefs and revisions, and by the second, she realized no one was treating her like a temporary hire or a charity case. Ideas mattered here. Execution mattered more. She worked longer hours than she meant to, often forgetting the time until the office lights dimmed automatically. When a senior manager dismissed her proposal for a regional campaign as too risky, she didn't shrink. She rebuilt it overnight, added data, sharper visuals, and a rollout plan so clean it left no room for doubt. The next morning, the room went quiet as she spoke. Even the executives, known for shredding junior staff, leaned back and listened. Someone cleared their throat and said, "Let's try it." Zara walked out shaking, not from fear, but from the strange thrill of being taken seriously. Juno noticed, not in the dramatic way she expected, but in small, unsettling details. He knew her project timelines without looking at notes. He asked precise questions that cut to the core of her ideas. Once, when an executive spoke over her during a presentation, Juno raised a single finger and waited until the room stilled. "Let her finish," he said, calm and final. No one argued. She began to see him beyond the reputation that clung to his name. There was the strategist who could read a room in seconds, the leader who remembered the names of interns and the birthdays of security staff. When a junior designer's father fell ill, Juno quietly arranged flexible hours and medical support without turning it into a display of generosity. He walked the floors late at night, checking on teams still working, not to intimidate them, but to make sure they had eaten. On Sundays, she learned, he disappeared entirely. One weekend, when a delivery mix-up sent her to the wrong address with campaign materials, she saw him through an open gate, seated beside an elderly woman in a small garden. He laughed easily there, his posture relaxed, listening more than he spoke. She left without interrupting, carrying that image with her like a secret. He courted her the way he did everything else, carefully. They began with lunches in the employee cafeteria, of all places. Executives would hover nearby, unsure whether to sit, until Juno waved them away and focused on Zara as if the rest of the room had dissolved. He asked about her childhood, her move, the things she missed without framing them as weaknesses. When she mentioned craving the snacks she grew up with, he nodded once. A week later, a small package appeared on her desk. Familiar wrappers, imported and arranged neatly, as if someone had taken the time to get it right. Books followed. Not expensive first editions or obvious statements, but titles she had mentioned in passing, margins unmarked, spines unbroken. Each gift came without ceremony. No card, no expectation, just proof that he listened. Their conversations stretched beyond work. He spoke about responsibility, about the cost of building something that lasted, about the line between protection and control. He never gave her the whole story, but he offered pieces, carefully chosen, like stepping stones across deep water. She found herself trusting him without fully understanding why, drawn to the steadiness beneath the sharp edges. Not everyone watched this unfold with quiet interest. Park Sung-min observed from a distance, his smile thinning by the day. He had been with Juno longer than most, had seen the blood and fire before the polish. One evening, he asked Zara to stay behind after a meeting. His tone was gentle, almost concerned. He slid his phone across the table. The photographs were old, grainy, but clear enough. Juno standing amid wreckage. Juno with knuckles split and darkened. Faces she didn't recognize, fear frozen in their eyes. "This is the man you're getting close to," Park said softly. "I thought you should know." Zara stared at the screen, a cold weight settling in her chest. She didn't deny what she saw. She didn't excuse it either. What unsettled her was how easily the images fit beside the man she now knew. The protector, the strategist, the grandson in a quiet garden. She handed the phone back without a word. That night she stayed late, the office nearly empty. Juno found her there, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired. He didn't ask about Park. He didn't explain himself. They sat in silence for a moment that felt heavier than any confession. Finally, he said, "People are not only the worst things they've done." It wasn't a defense. It was a truth offered without pressure. Zara nodded, unsure where she stood, but certain of one thing. She was already inside his world, and leaving it would not be as simple as walking back through the door she'd entered. The campaign closed on a quiet triumph, not the kind that demands champagne towers or speeches, but the kind that settles into the bones and tells you the work mattered. Zara felt it in the small messages from users who said the launch had found them at the right moment, in the numbers that rose without fuss, in the way Juno watched the final metrics load and then exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath all day. He didn't suggest a rooftop or a tasting menu. He simply asked her to trust him for dinner. They walked a narrow street she would never have found on her own, past shop windows fogged by steam and neon letters that hummed against the evening. Inside, the room smelled like pepper and palm oil and heat. A television murmured above the counter. Someone laughed in a language that carried home inside it. Juno ordered without looking at a menu, his Korean folding gently around the names, and when the plates arrived, jollof with a deep red sheen, suya charred just right, agouti thick and comforting, Zara stared at him, startled into silence. He shrugged, almost shy. He had asked his staff to search because he wanted her to taste something that knew her name. They ate with their hands and talked about nothing that mattered until everything did. She told him about Lagos evenings, when power cut mid-story and the city filled the gap with noise. He told her about being young and hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. The walls closed in kindly, and for once she didn't feel like she was being studied. When he reached across the table to wipe a smear of sauce from her thumb, the room tipped. The kiss came soft and unplanned, tasting of spice and relief. It was the kind that promises to take care, not to take. The promise shattered with the crack of gunfire. The sound was wrong, too sharp for a backfire, too close for comfort. Glass burst somewhere behind them. Chairs scraped. Juno moved before Zara understood what was happening, his body already turning into a shield as men appeared from nowhere, dragging them down and away. Another crack split the night. A bodyguard fell hard, the impact sickening in its finality. Zara's mouth opened, but no sound came. Blood was not abstract when it was warm and pooling, when it had a face. They were inside a car that smelled of leather and metal and fear, moving fast enough to press her into the seat. Juno's jaw was set, his hand a steady weight at her knee, grounding and heavy with meaning. She stared at her reflection in the dark window and didn't recognize the woman looking back. The city blurred, indifferent. The penthouse rose like a citadel above the noise, all glass and distance. Doors locked with a sound that felt both safe and condemning. Zara wandered rooms that gleamed and watched guards take up positions as if this were normal, as if the world had always arranged itself around threat. The quiet was loud. When she finally sat, her hands shook enough that she tucked them beneath her thighs and waited. Juno didn't pace. He sat across from her and told the truth the way a surgeon tells a patient what will happen next. He spoke of alliances and debts, of names that meant nothing to her but had shaped his life. He spoke of orders given and carried out, of nights he still woke sweating, of blood that did not wash off no matter how carefully he tried. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not soften the edges. He told her he could not promise safety, only honesty. When he finished, he placed an envelope on the table between them. Inside was a future that didn't include him. Money enough to return to Lagos, to start again without looking over her shoulder. No strings, no messages. He said he would understand if she took it. He said he wanted her alive more than he wanted her near. Zara stood and walked to the window. Seoul spread below, a living thing that refused to pause for her crisis. She thought of the man on the street, of the weight of Juno's hand when the car lurched, of the dinner chosen with care. Fear sat in her chest. Honest and bright. So did something else, harder to name, stubborn as a seed pushing through concrete. She turned back and left the envelope untouched. She told him she would not be bought out of her own choices. She said she would stay, eyes open, because running now would not make her braver later. Juno closed his eyes for a second, not in relief, but in acceptance. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, two people stood on the fault line and decided together to hold. Madame CEO did not summon Zara the way one summons staff or enemies. The invitation arrived quietly, carried by a young woman with careful manners and a small box of pastries wrapped in plain paper. Tea, the note said. No conditions. No witnesses. Zara almost laughed at the politeness of it, because politeness from that house always came with a blade hidden behind silk. Still, she went. Refusing would only feed whatever conclusions the old woman was already drawing. The tea room sat apart from the main house, its windows open to the late afternoon air. Madame CEO stood when Zara entered. The gesture alone felt like a crack in the world. She bowed her head, not deeply, but enough to matter. The apology came without decoration. She said she had spoken in anger before. She said she had treated Zara as if she were an object to be bought, and that this had been wrong. She said Zara was not for sale. The words were precise, almost surgical, as though she had rehearsed them until they caused no weakness to show. Zara accepted the tea and said nothing. Silence had become a skill she had learned the hard way. Madame CEO watched her carefully, as if recalibrating an equation that no longer behaved as expected. Then the old woman began to talk, not about Zara, but about loss. she spoke of a night 15 years ago when her son and daughter-in-law did not come home. She did not describe blood or screams. She did not need to. The weight of it sat in the room like smoke that refused to clear. Juno had been 15, old enough to understand exactly what had been taken from him, young enough to believe it would happen again if he did not become something dangerous. Madame CEO said he learned early that kindness invited extinction. He built what he built because fear was cheaper than funerals. She told Zara that the empire was never about hunger for power. It was a wall. Every deal, every threat, every alliance was brick laid against enemies who did not forget and did not forgive. Juno learned to sleep lightly. He learned to trust almost no one. He learned that survival was a task that never ended. When Madame CEO spoke of an heir, her voice did not tremble, but it thinned. Without one, she said, everything Juno had built would collapse inward. Men who smiled at his table would wait patiently for his death. The Lee family, she added, had always been patient. They were already watching, already measuring the spaces where weakness could be inserted. Blood, in families like theirs, was not sentiment. It was structure. Then she looked at Zara again, really looked, as though seeing a person rather than a variable. She said she was not asking for a contract dressed up as affection. She was asking for a partnership, a marriage where both sides stood upright. Zara would not be erased or controlled. She would be protected, publicly and privately. The family name would shield her, and in return she would choose to stand with Juno, not behind him. Zara listened, heart steady in a way that surprised her. She thought of her own history, of how survival had always meant moving lightly, leaving before roots could make pain sharper. She did not answer. She said only that she needed time. Madame CEO nodded, accepting this without offense, which was perhaps the most unsettling part of the afternoon. What neither of them said out loud was already in motion. Across the city, in an office that smelled faintly of old paper and expensive liquor, the Lee family's investigators spread Zara's life across a table. It was not much. A few addresses, a work history that skipped like a scratched record, a visa that hung by a thread, renewed just enough times to look deliberate, but not enough to look safe. Someone pointed out the gaps. Someone else smiled. They learned that Zara had no powerful relatives, no permanent status, no legal anchor that could not be cut quietly. Deportation was not a threat that needed shouting. It was paperwork. It was timing. It was a call made to the right desk on the right day. Vulnerability, they agreed, was most useful when the person carrying it did not know how exposed they were. By the time Zara left the tea house, the sky had begun to dim, the kind of dusk that makes every street look undecided about what it wants to be. She did not know she was being studied, weighed, and categorized. She only knew that the ground beneath her life had shifted. An offer had been made that was not simple enough to refuse and not clean enough to accept without cost. She walked home slowly, thinking of Juno as a boy who had learned too early that love could be taken away, and of herself as a woman who had learned that staying was always the riskier choice. Somewhere between those two truths, something dangerous was forming. The report arrives without a name attached to it, typed, precise, and cruel in its timing. Zara feels the ground shift the moment the letter is placed in her hands, the paper heavier than it should be, as if it carries not ink, but judgment. Someone has decided she does not belong. Someone has decided to pull the thin thread that keeps her life intact. She knows before anyone says it aloud who did this. The Lee family has always preferred clean hands and quiet damage. This is their style. The days that follow feel unreal. Appointments blur together. Voices speak at her instead of to her. Her name becomes a case number. Juno watches her carefully, the way one watches a flame in a room full of gas, controlled on the outside, panic tightening beneath his calm. He listens to lawyers. He listens to fixers. He listens to men who measure human lives by leverage and timing. Every path circles back to the same answer: marriage. Juno does not dress it up when he finally says it. No speeches, no pressure, just the truth, offered gently as if it might break her. He tells her it would end the threat. It would close the door the Lees have opened. It would place her beyond reach. Zara hears him, truly hears him, and still shakes her head. She refuses with a steadiness that surprises even her. She will not be cornered into vows signed in fear. She will not wake up one day wondering whether love was real or simply the price of survival. If she is going to say yes, it will be because she chooses him, not because the world leaves her no other choice. Juno accepts her answer, though it costs him. He does not argue. He does not bargain. He only tightens the circle around her, doubles security, and begins planning for the worst outcome while hoping it never arrives. Someone else is watching too. Park Sung-min reads the situation like a chessboard. To him, Zara is not a woman, but an opening. He leaks carefully, selectively, letting it slip to the right enemies that during the deportation process she will be vulnerable. Alone, temporarily stripped of the shield Juno's name provides. It is enough. Men who thrive on chaos do not need more than that. The attack comes on a morning that looks ordinary. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, the low murmur of other lives being processed. Zara senses the shift before the shouting starts, the way a room changes when danger enters it. The first gunshot cracks the air, sharp and final. People scream. Someone grabs for her arm. Her bodyguard moves without hesitation. He pushes her down a side corridor, his hand firm at her back, his voice low and steady even as blood spreads across his shirt. He takes the shots meant for her. He buys her seconds with his life. Zara does not look back until she is forced to, and when she does, something inside her fractures beyond repair. She escapes because he makes sure she does. By the time Juno arrives, the building is chaos wrapped in sirens. He finds her sitting on the floor in a quiet room, knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide and unfocused. She is alive. That is the only word that matters. He crosses the space between them and pulls her into him, careful and fierce all at once, as if holding her is the only thing anchoring him to the world. Later, after statements and silence and the heavy truth of loss settles into the air, Juno asks her again. Not in an office, not with documents waiting. He asks her in the raw aftermath, when pretense has burned away. He tells her he loves her. He tells her he is done pretending that restraint is strength. He tells her he cannot picture a life that does not include her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she looks at him when she thinks he is being foolish. He does not mention visas. He does not mention protection. He asks her because he wants her, fully and openly, for as long as she will have him. Zara looks at him through the fog of grief and shock, and sees the truth in his eyes. She thinks of the man who died for her. She thinks of how fragile choice can be, how quickly time can be stolen. She thinks of all the reasons she said no before, and how none of them exist in this moment. She says yes. The word is soft, but it changes everything. Juno closes his eyes as if he has been holding his breath for months and can finally let it go. He presses his forehead to hers, not claiming, not celebrating, just grounding them both in the reality that they are still here. Outside, enemies plot and consequences wait. Inside, two people choose each other without fear standing between them. For the first time since the trap was sprung, Zara feels something close to safety, not because the danger is gone, but because she no longer faces it alone. The morning of the wedding arrived softly, without warning, as if Seoul itself had decided to hold its breath. The venue sat at the edge of the city, where glass and steel gave way to open courtyards and carefully tended trees. Silk banners brushed the air. Drums rested beside string instruments. Nothing about the day felt rushed. It felt deliberate, chosen. Zara stood still as attendants moved around her, adjusting fabric, smoothing seams, checking pins twice. Her gown carried quiet Nigerian strength in its structure, while the details nodded to Korean tradition: clean lines, subtle embroidery, a balance between restraint and pride. When she caught her reflection, she barely recognized the woman looking back, not because she looked different, but because she looked certain. Juno waited beneath a canopy of white and gold, dressed in ceremonial layers that honored his lineage without shouting it. His expression was calm, but his hands betrayed him. They clenched once, then relaxed. When Zara appeared, the crowd faded in something distant and unimportant. For a man who had built his life on control, this moment stripped him of it completely. Madame Seoul sat in the front row, dressed in deep jade, her posture upright, her smile unguarded. She had seen this world from every angle: power gained, power lost, loyalty tested until it cracked. Yet there she was, watching Juno look at Zara as if the rest of the universe had finally arranged itself correctly. Her eyes shone, and she made no effort to hide it. The ceremony unfolded like a conversation between cultures rather than a performance. Vows spoken with care, blessings offered in 2 languages, gestures that carried history without dragging it forward. When Juno and Zara bowed, not just to each other, but to their elders, the meaning settled deep. This was not only a union of 2 people, it was a deliberate joining of worlds that were never supposed to meet this way. Applause followed them into the reception hall, where music shifted easily between rhythms, where food told its own story of migration and belonging. Laughter rose without effort. For once, no one looked over their shoulder. Even the guards seemed to loosen, their eyes scanning out of habit rather than fear. Juno held Zara's hand as they moved through the room, greeting guests, accepting blessings, returning smiles. For a brief, almost dangerous moment, the life he had always known felt far away. No rival families, no calculations, just a woman beside him who knew exactly who he was and had chosen him anyway. When the time came for speeches, Juno took the microphone without ceremony. His voice carried easily, steady, and unforced. He spoke of partnership, not destiny. Of trust built in small moments, not dramatic gestures. Then he turned to Zara, and the shift in the room was immediate. He explained the gift simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A company already formed, fully funded, independent from his organization. A marketing firm with global reach, placed entirely in her hands, with her named as CEO. No hidden oversight, no silent veto. Hers. The room reacted before Zara did. Gasps, murmurs, a ripple of surprise that moved faster than thought. She stared at him, searching his face for the familiar signs of control or calculation. She found none, only certainty. For the first time, the truth landed fully. He did not see her as an extension of his power or a symbol at his side. He saw her as someone who deserved space to build something of her own, equal, not protected, trusted, not managed. Her voice shook when she thanked him. She did not try to hide it. The music resumed, glasses lifted. The night leaned back into celebration. Then everything fractured. It began quietly, with Juno's phone vibrating against his palm. One message, then another. His expression changed, not sharply, but enough. Years of instinct snapped into place. He excused himself without explanation, stepping aside as his security chief approached, face drained of color. Accounts frozen, access denied, communications compromised, names surfaced that should never have been spoken together. Park Sung-min. The betrayal was total. Not sudden, but layered. Months of information passed to the Lee family. Meetings misreported, assets slowly redirected. A legal framework prepared in advance, clean enough to pass initial scrutiny. A coup designed to look like procedure. Park had positioned himself carefully as a loyal operator, as the man who handled what Juno preferred not to see. Now he stood ready to claim control, presenting himself as the only stabilizing option in the chaos he had created. Then came the message that cut deeper than numbers or titles. Madame CEO was gone. Taken quietly during the reception, while attention had been elsewhere. No struggle, no scene, just absence, discovered too late. Insurance, Park called it, a word spoken without shame. The music still played as Juno returned to Zara, his face unreadable. She knew before he spoke. The room felt suddenly too bright, too loud, too fragile. Guests continued to laugh, unaware that the foundation beneath them had already cracked. The perfect night collapsed in on itself, not with screams or broken glass, but with the cold clarity of betrayal fully revealed. And as Juno met Zara's eyes, the promise of the day did not disappear. It hardened. Whatever came next would not be gentle. The call came just before dawn, the kind of call that changes the shape of the day before the sun even rises. Juno listened in silence, his face unreadable, but Zara saw the shift in his shoulders, the way his breath shortened. Madame CEO had been taken. Park Sung-min's voice followed soon after, smooth and patient, offering terms that were not terms at all. Surrender everything. Step aside. Hand over the structure Juno had spent his life building, or watch his grandmother disappear for good. For the first time since she had known him, Juno looked unsure. Power had always been his language. Threats, strategy, pressure, these were tools he understood. But this was a blade aimed at the one person he could not lose. He prepared to give in, already thinking through how to fold the empire into Park's hands with minimal bloodshed. Zara watched him and felt a quiet anger rise, not at him, but at the idea that this was the only ending anyone could see. She refused to sit still and wait. Zara had spent her life spotting gaps others overlooked. While Juno's men thought in terms of territory and force, she thought in patterns, stories, timing. Park Sung-min did not rule through loyalty alone. He ruled through fear and image. And image could be broken. She reached out to the few people in Juno's circle who still listened to her, not because she was the boss's wife, but because they had seen her mind at work before. Quietly, carefully, she built a plan that did not involve guns. Old financial trails, shell companies, political favors that had never fully vanished. She gathered them and shaped them into a single narrative. Then she released it all at once. Journalists received documents they could not ignore. Regulators found their inboxes flooded. Police units already uneasy about Park suddenly had reasons they could act on. The effect was immediate. Park's allies began to scatter. His name appeared everywhere, attached to words he could not scrub away. While the city watched the collapse, Juno moved. In the confusion, he reached the safe house where Madame CEO was being kept. There were no speeches, no dramatic standoff. He took her home before Park even realized the trap had closed. By the time Park Sung-min was arrested, his power had already bled out through headlines and handcuffs. Juno stood beside Zara that night, the city humming below them, and said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was not about revenge or victory. It was about change. The months that followed were quieter, harder. Juno did not pretend he could erase the past, but he refused to let it dictate the future. He separated what could stand in daylight from what could not. Legitimate businesses were stripped away, cleaned up, placed under real oversight. The darker parts were dismantled piece by piece. He kept his influence, but reshaped it, learning a different kind of control, one built on visibility instead of fear. 6 months into that work, Zara found herself staring at a test in the bathroom, hands shaking. When she told Juno, his composure broke. He sat down, covered his face, and cried in a way that surprised them both. It was not weakness. It was release. For the first time, the future felt larger than survival. A year later, Madame Seoul held her great-grandchild with hands that had once seemed carved from stone. She studied Zara for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied. She said she could not have chosen better, even if she had searched the whole world. The words landed with a weight Zara felt in her chest long after. Zara's company grew faster than she expected. Clients trusted her instinct, her ability to read people and markets without losing herself as she split her time between Seoul and Lagos, refusing to abandon either part of who she was. Each city asked something different of her, and she gave both what she could without apology. One afternoon, long after the worst had passed, they stood on the street corner where everything had begun. Zara laughed as she handed out flyers for her firm, teasing Juno the way she always had. Their child slept against his chest, small and warm, while his bodyguards tried very hard not to smile. The city moved around them, unaware, unchanged, and somehow entirely new. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If Juno's choice shook you, if Zara's courage surprised you, then don't let this be where our connection ends. Subscribe to this channel and tap that like button now, not later, because it tells me this kind of story matters to you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. A city, a country, a quiet corner of the world. I read every single one. Your comment isn't just a click. It's you stepping into this story with me. Stay with me, because stories like this don't fade. They continue. See you in the next one.